This video is video 3 of 3 on adding and subtracting mixed numbers. And this time we'll be looking at subtracting mixed numbers with different denominators. So again, like adding mixed numbers with different denominators, we're going to go through two different methods for each example, and then you can choose which method you prefer. So example 1, 5.5 minus 1 7/8. So from before we can change these into improper fractions. So we know that 5.5 is the same as 11 halves. And 1 7/8 is the same as 15/8. Giving us 11 halves minus 15/8. Now we can't subtract these just yet because they have different denominators. So we need to find equivalent fractions for these that have the same denominator, and this would entail just changing the 11 over 2. And we can express that in terms of eighths by multiplying both numerator and denominator by 4. We're still subtracting our 15/8 here. And then we know that 44 over 8 minus 15 over 8 is 29 over 8, which as a mixed number is 3 5/8. Here's one for you to try using method 1 with improper fractions. If you pause the video just now to try it, and then you can come back and check if you've got the correct answer. Okay, so hopefully you've got on well with that one. So let's have a look at what you should have done here. So 2 1/6 as an improper fraction is 13/6, and 3 1/3 as an improper fraction is 10/3, giving us 13/6 minus 10/3. We need common denominators here, which for this one entails us changing the 10/3 to 20 over 6. So 13/6 minus 26 gives us negative 7/6, or as a mixed number, negative 1 1/6. Now let's look at example 1 again, using a different method. So we've got 5.5 minus 1 7/8. Now subtracting is the same as adding the additive inverse. So the additive inverse of 1 7/8 is negative 1 7/8. Now, we're going to split this up so that we examine the whole numbers first and then examine the fractions. So 5 plus negative 1 is 4. And a half plus negative 7/8, well, we need same denominators here. So that's the same as 4/8 plus negative 7/8, which altogether gives us negative 3/8. So back to the question in hand, we can express that as 4 add negative 3/8. Now, in a diagram, 4 would look like this in terms of eighths, which as you can see is 32/8. 32/8 add negative 3/8. So there's our negative 3/8. And you can see we've got 29/8 left over, which as a mixed number is 3 5/8. Now here's one for you to try, and again it would be a good time to pause the video and you can come back and check if you've got the correct answer. Okay, so let's have a wee look at this one. We know that subtracting 3 1/3 is the same as adding the additive inverse. So it's the same as adding negative 3 1/3. Examining the whole numbers first, we've got 2 plus negative 3, which gives us negative 1. Then we've got 1/6 plus negative 1/3, which is the same as 1/6 plus negative 2/6. And that gives us negative 1/6. So back to the question in hand, we can express that as negative 1 plus negative a sixth, given what we've done at the side here. Adding those together gets us negative 1 and 1/6. Now let's have a look at another example using method 1 again, which was using improper fractions. So we've got 5½ minus 1 7/9, which is the same as 11/2 minus 16/9. We need common denominators in order to be able to subtract these. So 11/2 in terms of 18ths is 99/18ths, and 16/9 in terms of 18ths is 32/18ths. Carrying out this subtraction then gets us 67/18ths, or as a mixed number, 3 and 13/18ths. Here's one for you to try, 2 and 1/6 minus 1 and 7/9. And again at this point it would be a good idea to stop the video while you go and try this question. Okay, so 2 and 1/6 then, as an improper fraction, is 13/6, and we know from before that 1 and 7/9 is 16/9. We can't carry out this subtraction yet because we don't have common denominators. So our common denominator will be 18. So 13/6 in terms of 18ths is 39/18, because we've multiplied both numerator and denominator by 3. For 16/9 we need to multiply both numerator and denominator by 2, giving us 32/18. Carrying out that subtraction gives us 7/18. Now we'll look at example 2 again, using the second method, which involved splitting up the subtraction of the whole numbers and the fractions, and then bringing that back together. So here we've got 5½ minus 1 and 7/9, which we know that subtracting is the same as adding the additive inverse. So 5½ plus negative 1 and 7/9. We look at our whole numbers first. 5 plus negative 1 gives us 4. And 1/2 plus negative 7/9, well, we can express these in terms of 18ths. So 9/18 plus negative 14/18, and that gives us negative 5/18. Getting back to the question in hand, we can express that as 4 plus negative 5/18. If we look at a diagram of our 4 here in terms of our 18ths, we see this. And that's 72/18 plus negative 5/18. There's our negative 5/18. We're left with 67/18, which is the same as 3 and 13/18. Here's one for you to try, and again if you pause the video while you have a shot at this. Okay, welcome back folks. So this one here, we know that subtracting 1 and 7/9 is the same as adding the additive inverse of 1 and 7/9. Examining our whole numbers, 2 plus negative 1 gives us 1. 1/6 plus negative 7/9 for our fractions. Well, we need to express these again in terms of 18, because that's the lowest common multiple of 6 and 9. So we have 3/18 plus negative 14/18, and that gives us negative 11/18. So back to the original question, we've got 1 plus negative 11/18, which is the same as 7/18.